Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. For a while, I've been hearing about how great FPGAs are, and especially the Mister project in particular. Well, I've finally jumped aboard the FPGA train, and I'm ready to tell you if it's all worth it, if it's all hype, or somewhere in between. Today I'll be reviewing the Mister Pi from Retro Remake, which you may know better as Taki Udon's company. This is my first FPGA device, so I'm coming in knowing a lot about them, but not having used one before. Also, I bought this with my own money actually right before my car broke down, or this review would have been delayed or maybe never happened at all. Anyway, all opinions are completely my own. No one's seeing it before it goes live. And just for full disclosure, I did ask Taki Udon for a review unit, but he never responded, which is what I expected, since my channel hasn't covered FPGAs in the past, so no hard feelings on that one either. Now, a very brief explanation on what FPGAs are and what the Mister project is and how it came to be. If you think FPGA stands for Fat Pigs Getting Angry, well, you're wrong! FPGA stands for Field Programmable Gate Array. With an FPGA, you can essentially tell the programmable chip on board what other chip or chips it should mimic the behavior of. Because this is done at the hardware level, we should in theory be able to get several benefits over software emulation, including better accuracy and more correct timing. Not so fast though, FPGA fans. How do you get one chip to behave like another chip or system? Well, it has to be programmed in by a human being based on documentation created by other humans, and is often done in an HDL or hardware description language like Verilog. All of this means accuracy isn't guaranteed. There are lots of points along the way where errors and imperfections are possible, just as with software emulation. We'll talk about some of that a little later on in the video. By the way, let's talk about Mister itself. Mister is a project that brings together FPGA implementations of multiple game systems, computers, and arcade boards, among a few other things. It's pretty comprehensive today, but Mister was based on a project named MIST, which stood for Amiga ST, referring to the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST computers. Now, Mister originally stood for MIST on Jurassic board. The Mister project runs on a board from Jurassic known as the DE10 Nano, which has fluctuated in price quite a bit over the years. These days, as I record this, it hovers around $230 or so, and I've seen the board go for more than $300. A complete setup with everything you need, including other boards and components, will cost anywhere from about $400 to $650 and has also fluctuated a lot over time. Just this year, in 2024, there are finally clones and competitors for the Jurassic DE10 Nano and the other required or optional Mister equipment. We have a board that came out earlier this year from QM Tech for $99, and Retro Remake just recently released the Mister Pi, which goes for $95 for just the main board itself, or comes in a few different kits with more stuff for either $155 or $180 as I record this. That's a gigantic discount from a full Mister setup, and finally makes general FPGA gaming affordable for a lot more people. So today I can really answer the question, is it worth it? So let's get on with it. Alright, I can't talk about whether or not it's worth it without starting by talking about hidden costs that you might experience even with affordable FPGAs like the Mister Pi. Some of the things you need you may already have, others you might have to buy. So I'll cover the real cost of ownership here. And this doesn't apply just to the Mister Pi, but pretty much any hardware based on the Mister project currently available as I record this in December of 2024. So number one, shipping. Mister Pi in particular is made in China and ships directly from China. This means you can expect to spend roughly at least $20 for the cheapest available shipping option through 4PX. So if you see a package listed at $180 on the Mister Pi website, you're really going to be looking at $200. The $95 Mister Pi board only is really closer to $115. Now that's understandable. Having bought a few things from China in recent years, this is a pretty normal rate. I just don't want anyone considering buying one to have sticker shock from the shipping pricing. Number two, power. No version of the Mister Pi, at least as of the end of 2024, includes an AC adapter. Taki Udon has mentioned a few reasons for this. I understand them, but I still hate this trend of not including AC adapter bricks with devices that absolutely need them. You might have something at home you can already use to power the Mister Pi, but if you don't, you can expect to spend another $5 to $10 or so on an AC adapter. Number three is input devices. If you're like me, you probably have a bunch of keyboards, mice, and gamepads that you can use with the Mister Pi. If these are USB, you should be fine. To get the most out of the Mister Pi though, you may specifically want a wired controller that's been reported to have especially low latency. So depending on what you've already got laying around your house, this might cost you nothing extra at all, or you might have to toss in another $30 to $60 depending on how much quality you want for a controller, and then more if you need to add a keyboard and mouse. Number 4, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. If you want to add wireless networking and or Bluetooth support, you'll probably be looking at an additional $5 to $15 for a USB dongle that supports both options. So when all is said and done here, the real cost of ownership for a Mister Pi, let's go with the big pack that includes a bunch of stuff you'll probably want, is really going to be more like $250 to $300 depending on how much extra stuff you need. Of course, if you have everything, then you're looking at pretty much exactly $200 for the big pack after shipping. Again, I want to stress, I'm not knocking anyone here, I don't think anyone's being greedy, this is just how it is, and I want anyone watching this video and considering buying a device like this up front to know that you'll probably have to spend more than you're thinking just looking at the price of the boards themselves or even the kits available on the website. This applies to all boards, not just the Mister Pi. Let me stress, this is a review video, not a tutorial, so I'm not going to do a deep dive into the setup of Mister. Depending on the configuration of the Mister Pi you purchased, you'll have either a lot of setup to do, or just a little setup to do. If you've got it with a pre-configured microSD card, you likely will only need to add your games and maybe a script or two. In my case, I bought a turbo pack, and it came fully assembled and already inside the shell with the included micro SD card pre-flashed and pre-inserted. Even so, there were quite a few things I still had to do to get everything fully up and running. On a difficulty scale ranging from super easy, barely an inconvenience to that's totally bananas, it's probably more towards the easy side, but those without much technical know-how may have a little trouble getting it set up themselves. So you'll probably be visiting GitHub pages, researching file types, checking out script instructions, looking for information on how to rename boot ROMs and things like that. So no, it's not super hard, but anyone who is not especially technically inclined and just wants to play games, well, they may not be able to handle the setup process at all themselves. So if setting up a Raspberry Pi is, let's say, a 3 out of 10 on a difficulty scale, then setting up a Mister is more like a 5 out of 10. So don't be scared, most people will be able to handle it, I think. But don't go in expecting to open the box, plug it in, and just start playing games right away. You've got to do some work first. So why go with an FPGA? Well, the practical benefits for gamers who want to play their classic systems on something like a Mister should in theory be a more accurate recreation of the original system than is possible through software emulation, greatly reduced input delay, and the ability to more easily connect to older analog components like CRT VGA monitors. Now my last remaining CRT is currently not available to use in this review, so I'm going to focus on the gameplay experience on a Mister Pi instead. And when you hear me talk about software emulation, I'm referring to what you might experience, running on a mid to high-end PC, where it can handle pretty much every system with ease. Now, on to performance. First things first, with Mister, you'll only get systems from basically the dawn of gaming up through the 5th generation, which includes systems like the PlayStation, Saturn, and N64. Newer, more powerful systems like the Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, GameCube, PSP, etc. are not available on Mister, and on the current Cyclone 5 chip that powers the DE10 Nano and its clones, I don't know how likely it is we'll see any of those systems show up on that hardware in the future. So if you're cool with 5th gen and below, you're fine. If you want anything beyond that, emulation or real hardware are your options right now. So upon powering up the Mister Pi for the very first time and loading up a game, I have to say that I noticed immediately that yes, the input delay was considerably less than you'd find on pretty much any software emulators, even on relatively powerful computers, unless you enable run ahead for a few frames. The controls of many games feel immediately lighter and more responsive than you may be used to if you haven't played the games on real hardware at all or in a long time. Most of the games I tried on systems like the Genesis and SNES were fine, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice any glitches at all in the games that I tested, even on those platforms. Now I want to stress most games were fine, but when things weren't right, it was definitely noticeable. So I did see a few minor graphical glitches here and there in just a few games, and there were also some instances where sound effects didn't play, especially like where characters are supposed to jump in certain games, and I can't remember which ones. I'm sorry, I didn't write them down. I should have kept track of that. I thought I would remember, but I've had 20 hours of footage I recorded to go through, and I forgot. Sorry. Anyway, let's move on to a more powerful system like the Saturn. I tried a nice huge batch of Saturn games. Again, I'd say most ran completely fine. Accuracy and input latency were fine too. However, I did notice there were a few instances of slowdown during Saturn games that are not present on real hardware. Most cores are still a work in progress, so these issues may well be ironed out, and the Saturn core has especially been pretty frequently updated this year. But overall, I was very happy with the Saturn experience provided by the Mister Pi. I know newer versions of the core are out there, apparently not available through the optional Update All script, that also provide a couple of other options for things like deinterlacing games that run in interlaced resolutions like Virtua Fighter 2, Dead or Alive, and Fighters Megamix, for example. I look forward to be able to test those out in the future. I tried a few arcade titles out, and the experience was also really good. The most noticeable change, once again from software emulation, was the consistently reduced input delay. Super Contra, for example, felt way better and more responsive than any time I've played it via regular software emulation in the last 2+ decades. In lots of old classic titles, the more responsive controls were very noticeable, particularly in games like Burger Time, where I found it much easier to get off of ladders without getting stuck on them. I'd say that generally the faster action required by the game, the more likely it is that you're going to notice that input delay has been reduced. Now, I tried a lot of Game Boy Advance games on the Mister Pi, and performance was generally great, and the GBA core is one of the more fully featured cores out there on Mister right now, with loads of options and complete full save state support. I did notice a few issues with sprite priority in some games, where sprites that should have been rendered behind things were in front of them, but this only happened in 1 or 2 titles I tried, out of probably about 100. There is something else that affects a lot of games you might want to play using the Game Boy Advance core, and I will discuss that in the next section of the video in just a moment here. Let me finish up this section of performance by showing you a little bit of footage from PlayStation and N64 games to round things out. Now, I didn't encounter any notable issues in the games I tried on either core. PlayStation performance was just fine. N64 performance, also fine. Once again, playing with less input delay was the major draw to playing these systems on a Mister Pi versus a more powerful computer. Now, I'm not going to go out here and tell you that every game you'll play on those systems is perfect, but I can tell you for the maybe 30 or 40 that I tried, combined for those two systems, I didn't notice problems in any yet. Now, I'll play a lot more, but from my experience so far, things are looking pretty good for all 3 of the major 5th generation systems. So is Mister, and through extension Mister Pi, perfect? Well, no. Accuracy is really good on most cores and very high, but I've noticed the occasional minor issues here and there that I've already mentioned that I don't even see sometimes in certain software emulators. Things like that sprite priority being off in a few GBA games like I mentioned a moment ago, and also those few cores where I mentioned I noticed sound effects in games didn't always play when they should. Next up, like I told you with the Game Boy Advance core a few moments ago, it's a really great fully featured experience similar to modern emulation. Several cores lack some basic modern niceties though, such as save states, including ones that you wouldn't expect them to be missing from, like the Genesis/Mega Drive core. Keep in mind this could change in the future, but that's the way it is as I record this. Save states are coming soon to the SNES core. That's apparently in beta or something, literally just as of this week, so that'll be a welcome addition. But don't expect save states in every single core, you're not going to get that. Speaking of saving, if you remember the dark ages of emulation like me, you may have spent some time playing an RPG on the SNES, let's say, Lufia 2, gotten about 10 hours in, had a computer crash, booted the game back up after you got your computer running and discovered, hey, I lost the last 4 hours straight that I'd been playing even though I saved often. This happened because in the old days, many emulators didn't write in-game saves to your drive until the emulators were closed. And that's kind of how things are on the Mister right now. You can enable an autosave option in the core options for the systems of your choice, but it still only writes your game save to your SD card when you open the on-screen menu. If you forget to do that, you will lose your save. If you don't believe me, check out many of the forum posts discussing this topic. So those are the general Mister issues. Are there any Mister Pi specific problems? Well, I have one major gripe. no power button. Which is weird because the most popular boards for the standard Mister setup have a power button, and that's an odd thing to leave out on the Mister Pi. If you want to be able to turn the system off, you have to either unplug it, plug it into a power strip or surge protector with a switch on it, or get an AC adapter with a power button on the wire, just like they make for Raspberry Pis. Also, I'm still a little annoyed that no AC adapter is included. Like I said, I get it, but it is still annoying. In total, I probably spent somewhere between 40 and 50 hours playing games, recording them, updating scripts, and researching anything I was having trouble with for this review. I tried loads of game systems, arcade titles, and computers. I played around with a ton of settings, and I'm ready to give the Mister Pi a review score. On the positive end of the equation, the Mister Pi is way cheaper than a standard Mister setup. It's half price on a bad day, and about 1/3 or 1/4 of the price on a great day. Even if you buy the $180 Turbo Pack, which is about $200 after shipping like I said, you'll probably still feel this is an amazing value for what you get. The relative lack of input delay and snappy feel of most games, even on LCD and LED displays, is absolutely noticeable. I wouldn't say it's earth-shattering in most cases, but it is noticeable. And when it comes to accuracy, the Mister and Mister Pi by extension are pretty strong on that front too. But don't believe the hype that it's absolutely perfect for every system that I've seen on some of the more toxic Mister Evangelist social media accounts. Most cores are excellent right now, and even for the ones with a few minor issues, I absolutely appreciate the time, work, and skill that went into creating them. That part of the community is great and has my complete support. And the Mister Pi also has a few modifications to the DE10 Nano board that make it a little more friendly for a Mister setup in general, like USB-C power, not having to use short cables to connect layers of a sandwich board setup, and more. It is designed from the ground up for Mister. Now on the downside, it can be a little more challenging to configure than other devices like say Raspberry Pis, and you won't find as many options as you would in most modern emulators. The whole experience is just a bit more cumbersome than working on a modern PC. Having to remember to open the menu to save things isn't great, and there really should be a power button built in. But when all is said and done, I think the Mister Pi is a great little machine where the positives far outweigh the negatives, and because of that, I'm giving it a review score of 8 out of 10. There's definitely room for improvement, and Taki Udon has shown, even between batches of the Mister Pi, that he's not one to sit idly by. So future revisions will have some additional features not available on my Mister Pi, for example. Now I got mine from batch 2, by the way. Batch 3 will have built-in SD RAM instead of a RAM module connected to GPIO pins. Now, I will have more coverage on Mister Pi in the future, and may even start recording some comparison footage on it on a case-by-case basis. And now, it's your turn. Tell me, what do you think of the Mister Pi and FPGA gaming in general? Do you have a Mister Pi, or QM-Tech board? Are you thinking about getting one? Is anything other than the price holding you back? Tell me all about it in the comments. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here and continue to fund me purchasing products like the Mister Pi for a review, well, you can do that by contributing to my Patreon, to my Ko-fi account if you just want to do a one-time thing, or even right here on YouTube through channel memberships and things like Super Thanks. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.